Hello, ladies. We're going to talk about sex today. I'm excited. I hope you guys are excited. Okay, so I'm going to give it just a few minutes for you guys to join. If you see me doing this, I'm checking my notes over here. And let's see if I can turn off that do not disturb thing. So, how are we doing today? Hey, Megan. Hey, Deborah. I already have quite a few questions, or several questions that some of you had submitted. So be sure and drop a comment over here in the comment section if you have any additional comments or questions. Hey, Amanda. But today, some of what we're going to talk about is what some of you had asked about was about that whole scheduling thing, which is spontaneity. It kind of is hard to have sometimes with our Aspies. We're definitely going to talk about communication, what we need, how to talk to him about this stuff. Also how to develop or to feel like you have this emotional connection with your guy. Somebody had asked about sex therapy, and I actually have a really good friend who's a sex therapist, a colleague who's a sex therapist, and we have a sex therapist in the group here, Linda Creamer, I believe, mentioned that this is something that she does, so I hope she'll weigh in if she jumps on the call or watches the replay. And we're going to talk about some sensory challenges, foreplay, good stuff. So I am going to go ahead. So we've got several of you here already, and I don't want to take up too much of your time. So let's get started. And one of the first things I wanted to say to you guys is this video, this talk is not going to apply to every single one of your husbands or boyfriends or your guy, because everybody is going to be a little bit different. But what happens with something like Asperger's is we have all of these differences, but then we have common threads. And so one of the reasons, though, why one of you may say, my guy doesn't want to have sex at all, and another one of you may say, well, my guy wants to have sex all the time, and that's because it's a spectrum. And with Asperger's, we can be on one end or the other of that spectrum. So some guys are going to be seekers of sex, and some guys are going to be avoiders. So I wanted to point that out, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we get to the sensory section today. So just know that if it applies to you, it applies, but try to glean what you can out of this conversation, those common threads. So first I want to say, Carmen asked about the whole scheduling thing. How do you get used to the idea of scheduling intimacy? And one of the things that I wanted to say about that is, I'm a mom, and I know a lot of you guys are parents. Deborah has 4 kids and a little bitty infant. When we got kids, sometimes we have to schedule it anyway. But we can still try to have spontaneity. And if we're in a relationship with a guy who is not as good with that spontaneity, then it can, and if that's something we love, then that can be frustrating. I can actually relate to that personally, because my children are older now, they're teenagers. And the guy that I'm with, though, he's very, he has his times of day that are kind of the scripted times that he prefers to have sex. I'm a whole lot more spontaneous than that. But here's the thing. The way that I've personally been able to get around that is if it's good when we have it, then we have to pick our battles. And so the thing is if we're in a relationship with someone with Asperger's, it is what it is in some cases. And we have to really, truly figure out what the battles are that we want to pick. And we have to figure out how we're going to define what is acceptable and what is good to us. And we have to pay attention to those definitions in our heads. So, for example, I've got 2 examples here. Some of you have some kind of chronic illness, or you have children with some kind of illness. And Asperger's is a neurological disorder that we can't change. So, for example, if any of you have diabetes, Someone with diabetes cannot have sugar. And regardless of whether or not we still really love sugar, if we have diabetes, we can't have it. And if you love someone with diabetes, they're not going to eat sugar with you. So for us, when we're in a relationship with somebody who has Asperger's, and spontaneity is not something that they can do in their brain, it's something that's very difficult for them, we have to acknowledge and accept that this is what it is. And so if the sex is good but it's scheduled, then stop and think about, this is what I do. I stop and think, okay, do I want it or not? And if it's good and I get it, then it's okay. I had to learn how to be okay with not necessarily having the spontaneity. So much of this has to do with our own definition of what is acceptable, what's okay. And let's talk a little bit more about that. So, because it's super important that we pay attention to what our own expectations are, particularly when it comes to sex. But this applies to pretty much anything, whether it's who does the cooking or who does the house cleaning. We have to stop and think about what are our expectations. Let me see, Holly, you're saying the thing I struggle with is that someone with diabetes provides full disclosure when engaging in an intimate relationship with another human being. So are you saying that this person did not disclose to you that he has Asperger's? So I wanted to just clarify what you're saying. So if you can drop that in the comments, because I do know a lot of you actually have said that you didn't know going in that that your guy had Asperger's. The thing is, he may or may not know it either. And you can easily marry somebody who ends up having diabetes or getting diabetes or some other kind of illness that we have to adjust to. The point is, we have to think about our own expectations and what we consider to be good, what we consider to be quality. So, okay, let me move on. And Holly, if you respond, I'll keep an eye on the comment feed. Kelly, you asked about how do we communicate our likes and dislikes without offending. And so this is where we as women, we have to really get real with ourselves. We have to be willing to speak up. And for some people, it's the shyness somebody else had mentioned, the shyness, the awkwardness. Sometimes it's hard to be just flat out literal about what we want and what we need. So in sex with our guys, they oftentimes they need us to be very specific. We don't need to be vague or beat around the bush, and they need us to be exactly specific about what we like and what we don't like. And we need to phrase it not in terms of them having a flaw, because ladies, men and sexuality, their egos, their personality is very closely tied to their sexuality and their virility. So if we go to them and if we use phrases like "you never," or "you never do this," or "you never do that," or "why can't you," or if we have to watch the way we say things. And this is not just about sex either. This is about how we communicate to them what we like. And so if we're communicating it in a way that makes that basically is critical, then he's going to shut down. And so would we. We would totally shut down if he talked to us that way. Now, some of you may be really carefully considering the words that you use and how you communicate these things to him. But you really want to make sure he understands that you are looking to enhance this experience for both of you. And if he's kind of shocked at, well, I thought it was great, then okay, you can say, well, it's good, let's make it better. And I want to be a part of that. I want to make it better for you. He may say, well, it's fine. It's like, okay, well, it's actually not totally fine for me, but that's not because you're necessarily doing anything wrong, but let's see if we can spice it up and make it better. I want to talk to you guys a little bit about how you can go about doing that, because these guys are so literal. I know that telling them specifically what to do can be hard. So show them. And ask yourself, am I comfortable with touching my own body and showing him exactly what feels good to me? Because these guys, a lot of times, it's very hard for them to understand what you mean if you're not very specific. Now, some of you may not be comfortable with porn. So I know this is controversial, but I'm going to go ahead and put it out there. Sometimes it can be very helpful to find a video of what actually looks really pleasing to you and send it to him. Now, if that's something that you both are opposed to, then obviously don't do that. But I know that some guys are grateful for that feedback. If it's too uncomfortable for you to get really super detailed or show him, then if that's something you're comfortable doing, find a video and send it to him and say, hey, look, this really looks fun. Can we try this next time? And then ask him to do the same. Ask him to send you a video. Ask him specifically, what can I do for you that will make this even better? And it's not about fixing a problem, but making it better. That's the key. That's super important, is that you're looking to spice it up and make it better, not fix something he's doing wrong. Okay. Shoot me questions. All right, here we go. Oh, I see. I had to scroll down. Let's see. Okay, so Holly, let me go back to you for a second. He was diagnosed after 20 years. So this is something that he didn't actually know about, and you didn't either. And I understand how emotionally tormented that you have been. I want to communicate to you guys, I am not in any way dismissing your experience in this, because I am right there with you. But I also want to really stress that having Asperger's is also being it's a form of torment for your guys. The folks that I've worked with, both men and women who have Asperger's, have described to me how they literally feel like they are a different species and they're completely misunderstood. They don't understand themselves. They know that they're different. They know that the world sees them as different, and it's very painful to them. So the thing about Asperger's is that they may have emotionally walked all over you and steamrolled you, but someone who's a true Aspie and not a narcissist is never, well, I won't say never, but their goals are usually not to intentionally hurt you unless they're in defensive mode. And anybody can respond defensively and be hurtful. So if your guy didn't know about his Asperger's, it wasn't like he could tell you. It's kind of like when you're blind, you don't know what it looks like to be able to see. People with Asperger's have always had Asperger's. So they don't know that they don't know how the rest of us perceive the world. They don't know how the rest of us feel emotions. I was having a conversation with my guy just last night, and he said to me, I literally don't feel the same kind of passion and care that you feel for me. And so I said to him, so what you're saying is that you don't care about me as you don't care about me as much as I care about you. And he said, yes. Well, there was a time in my life when I would have been like, oh, that's painful, that hurts. But what he was saying to me was not that he doesn't care about me. He absolutely loves me. And I've learned to recognize the way he communicates and what he means by that. And what he means is that he doesn't experience that intensity of emotion that I do. He literally doesn't experience it. And he sees me experiencing it, and it baffles him. He's like, I don't even know what that is. And I have described that to him, and I've said this to some of you here, that he's more like standard definition, and I'm more like 4K TV for those techies out there. And so he doesn't even know how to feel, because he's not equipped to feel in that way. Okay, Holly, let me look back at your comment here. Yeah, so he knew you were in emotional pain. It's a hard journey. It's a hard struggle he knew you were in emotional pain, but he did not know. He has no way of understanding your perspective. He can see it, but he didn't know how to fix it. And I'm glad that he finally did get a diagnosis and that you have a framework now. And I understand that you have resentment and that there's a lot of pain there. But we also have to understand that this is a journey for them too, because this is not something that they've done deceptively by getting in a relationship with us and tormenting us emotionally. Okay, so hi, Christy. Glad you're joining us. Hi, Bonnie Jean. Okay, so Jackie, you're saying I'm over being blamed for being wrong because I can read between the lines or express emotions. So your guy is blaming you because you actually can see things that he can't see. And yes, this is like speaking different languages, guys. It's literally every time my kids watch these superhero movies, and then there's like these, like the Flash or whatever, and there's these different species. I literally think about having a relationship with an Aspie because it is literally like we are different species, and we who are neurotypical are capable of skill sets that someone with Asperger's is not, and we absolutely have to get our heads wrapped around that, because otherwise we continue to take things personally that they are not capable of. So I want to get back on the topic of sex, because we're getting off topic, and these are good questions and good conversations. And by the way, these are some of the things that we're going to talk about in the group coaching program that we announced yesterday in the group that I'm offering you guys. So I'll talk a little bit about that more at the end. Okay, so let's talk about emotional connection. So the question was asked about how to establish an emotional connection that's a prerequisite for sex. And so my thought about that is to redefine and reframe our idea of sex as in some ways being that emotional connection. And sex with an Aspie is very rarely going to be an emotionally intense experience like what we women dream about, having that emotional connection with a guy. It's not likely going to be that. But there is a connection that happens during sex. And if we can get over our own definitions of what sex is supposed to be like, then we can experience an amazing connection with our guy. Now, if you feel like you need to have that emotional connection before you're ready and willing or interested in sex, then it's very, very important to be looking at your guy's love language. Now, I don't know how many of you know about love languages, but Gary Chapman is this phenomenal author who wrote about love languages. I had the great opportunity to actually meet him in a workshop probably 20 years ago. And love languages are extremely important because we all give and receive love in different ways. And so if we give love and receive love in a way that's very different from the way that our guy gives and receives love, we may very much feel unloved. So, for example, I had this talk with my Aspie recently too. So the different love languages are quality time, acts of service, that's like doing stuff for others, physical touch, and this is not just sex, this is just running your finger through somebody's hair or just casually caressing their arm when you're in the car or whatever, gifts, and words of affirmation. So I am a words girl. I say I love you. I say I appreciate you. I say thank you. I write little notes. I put it in texts. I'm a words girl. I'm also a physical touch person. He is an acts of service and quality time guy. So this weekend I got kind of pissy with him because he had not been telling me he loved me a lot lately, and we both have been having really stressful weeks, and so I wasn't really feeling affirmed and loved. And his response to me was, "We just spent the whole day together, quality time." So we had gone to lunch, and we had done yard work together, which I do love doing with him. And then we watched a movie with our kids that night. And for him, that giving me that time, which he's an introvert and most Aspies are, giving me that time, spending that time with him is him loving me. And so I have to remind myself I have to recognize when I'm being loved, and then that also establishes an emotional connection to him. But he also has to remember to speak my love language too. So it's so important that you know your love language. I see several of you are words people, and our guys are usually not, right? Language is not their thing. They don't even use language the same way we do. How many times does this happen to you guys? We will have a conversation and he'll use a word that I'm like, I don't even know how that word fits in this conversation. And he's a linguist. My guy is a professional. He was a linguist in the Air Force. But we don't use terminology the same at all, which also, by the way, contributes to arguments when you start to recall a conversation that was had, and you totally remember things differently because we're using terminology really differently. So, yeah. So, oh, and Amanda, so your guy is a quality time guy. Be sure and recognize when your guy's loving you, and then that's going to help with that emotional connection. Okay. All right. Let's see. What time is it? Woo! It's getting away from us. Okay. What I want to say about that emotional connection too is to pay really close attention to your own internal dialogue, ladies. Really pay attention to the words, the narratives that you're telling yourself, because we can all get ourselves in major trouble by what we tell ourselves. If you find yourself having conversations with him in your head, stop. Because when you have these conversations in your head with him, he's not really there to participate, but yet you are experiencing this conversation. Pay attention to what it is that you're needing to say. Ask yourself why you're not saying it. But then also pay attention to the internal dialogue of how you are appraising a situation. One of the things that I've worked with a lot is anxiety. And anxiety is worry and fear. And so it has a lot to do with what our internal dialogue is and how we appraise something. In other words, the meaning we assign to it. So when something happens, whatever we decide that it means that's what becomes real to us. So when our guy does or says something and then we assign a meaning to it, well, he meant this, or he's upset with me, or he's trying to get back at me, whether that's the truth or not, it becomes real to us. And then that influences how we feel. My guy has told me over and over again that he's never going to do anything to intentionally hurt me. I believe him, but sometimes he says and does things that hurt. And I'm like, is he just trying to get even with me? Is he mad at me because of what I did, blah, blah, blah? He's not. And I have to pay attention to my internal dialogue and what the meaning is that I'm assigning to it. Okay, you guys ask, how do we get to hear words of affirmation if that's what we need? Yeah, okay, so yesterday, in the same conversation with my guy, with Brian, he kept telling me, I don't know how to do words. I don't know how. I'm going to try, but I don't know how. And then he asked me, can I write you little notes? And I was like, yes. And he didn't know that would be something that I would love. But those of us who are words of affirmation, it doesn't matter how we get the words, right? It can be spoken. It can be in a card. It can be a little note that's left on our pillow. Guys who have Aspergers typically have a hard time expressing those words to our face because they're having to process what to say. A lot of times eye contact is involved. It's hard for them. So you can let him know that you would love it if he would leave you little notes or even just tell you he loves you in a text. And that's a really specific thing that you can tell him would be a way to communicate with you. I told Brian, just fake it. If you're not feeling it, it doesn't matter. Tell me anyway, because if you love me in general, even if you're not feeling it in the moment, which Aspies are super literal. If I'm not feeling warm and fuzzy to you right now, why would I tell you I love you? Teach them to recognize how they feel in general and not how they're feeling in the moment. And just to remember maybe to tell you they love you at night. Just give them a script. And then you can't judge them for the script, though. You can't say, oh, I told you to do this, and so it doesn't count. If he makes an effort, the effort is what counts. Not because it's, if it's scripted or it doesn't have to be spontaneous. All right. Oh, Sarah, I'm glad this is helping you. Let's see. Christy Wiles, that's what I'm trying to realize. Okay. Grass always looks greener. Yes. Okay. I want to make sure I didn't miss Christy. Okay. I've dated NTs. I'm definitely value that NTs are intentionally neglectful. Yes, NTs can definitely be intentionally neglectful. Not so much for Aspies unless they're they're in self-preservation mode, and they do go into self-preservation mode, and let's talk about that. I'm going to skip on ahead and let's talk about sensory issues, because this is very much part of that self-preservation mode where Aspies can be intentionally hurtful, but usually it's when they feel caged and cornered. Now, I don't know how many of you know about sensory processing disorder, and that's a whole other live to do, a whole other training. But everybody who has autism, who has Asperger's, has sensory processing disorder. Now, not everybody who has sensory processing disorder has Asperger's or autism. So there are likely more of you in the family or their family that had sensory issues because sensory processing disorder is part of the genetic makeup of autism. And everyone who has autism actually does experience sensory processing challenges. So sensory processing challenges have to do with the way we see, smell, hear, taste, touch, where our body is in space. And with sensory processing disorder, we do not the brain does not interpret sensory input efficiently. And so that's why some people are sensory seekers, some are sensory avoiders, some seek out loud sounds, others absolutely can't tolerate smaller sounds. Some seek out sensation and movement, some can't tolerate certain textures. My guy loves crunchy foods, he can't stand mushy foods. My daughter, though, when she was born, she's Asperger's, she gagged on food until she was 2 because her brain couldn't process the sensation. So what does this have to do with sex? A lot, because there's a lot of sensation involved in sex, okay? One of you asked, this came up about how her guy's able to climax by self-stimulation, but he can't when they're having sex. And so a lot of that has to do with probably have pressure, the pressure that he can apply. I'm sorry, getting really graphic here, guys, but he can apply more pressure, he can adjust the speed more, and if his sensory threshold is such that he needs more, he needs something tighter to be able to actually feel that sensation, then there's nothing that can be changed really about that, other than if you explore different positions. Now, positions can make a huge difference. So this is something that you don't want to criticize him about, because he absolutely can't help it. It's like if you have a certain food that makes you gag when you eat it, if somebody makes fun of you about that and says, just do it, just try. I'm not saying you're making fun of him, at least. But if you're pressured to be okay with that food texture, you can't change that about how your brain interprets it. You can't change about what your brain needs. So with sex, there are so many sensory issues going on. Like, eye contact is super intense for most people with Asperger's, whereas those of us who are neurotypical, we bond and connect with eye contact. But for my guy especially, I know if I kind of try to get him to make eye contact, he completely loses it. He'll lose an erection because he's so, I mean, he will literally look at me with Google eyes like this. If I say, look at me, he's like, because he's trying to make that, he's trying to do it, but then this sexual arousal is just gone. So I've learned I do not try to get him to look at me. I don't ask him to look at me during sex. I had to learn to not get offended if he closes his eyes. You know, some women are like, oh, he's closing his eyes, he's probably fantasizing about another woman. No, he's actually concentrating and wanting it to be a great experience for me. And we've learned how to use positions so that we're not actually making that much eye contact, but he's able to touch me. And physical touch is my thing, okay? So I let it go. My idea of good sex means that we're gazing into each other's eyes, I let go of my idea of that and recognize that when we're not facing each other, he is a lot more able to touch me and caress me and turn my body into what feels like bliss with his hands. So much so that I get all worked up and hot and bothered when we're just sitting in the car and I look at his hands. So anyway, TMI lady, sorry. So it's super important to recognize what his sensory needs are. And if you will ask him and talk to him about those, and you may already know what some of these things are, don't force him, try to force him to fit into your what your image of good sex is. If he physiologically, because sensory challenges are neurological, he can't change it. He cannot change it no matter how much he tries. So it's about acceptance, accepting that he literally can't do this for you. And once you recognize that he can't, then if you change your expectation, okay, so you may have to give up some pieces of what you think of as a good sex life. I'm sorry, can you guys hear me? I keep leaning away from the mic, sorry. Somebody yell at me in the comments if I'm leaning too far away. But if you give up some of, we can't have perfection, and I know that you ladies are not looking for that. But again, pay attention to your expectations and what they are, and what's really okay. What can be really good to adjust when you adjust that expectation. Because if you adjust it and you can have this great sex life, then it's a win-win for both of you. All right. Let's see. Okay, thank you. You can hear me. Awesome. Thank you, ladies. Okay. Elise also talked about foreplay. And I love that she said that for her guy, hanging a towel rack is foreplay. And honestly, I am totally turned on if my guy's putting up a towel rack, but that's just me. Again, the foreplay, he may or may not know what to do. He may not. Guys sometimes ask me if they don't understand what it's for. And if we can, you might negotiate a deal with him and say, look, if you'll just agree to do this for me, then we can have sex more. And I sometimes I just tell my guy, look, I know you don't understand it. I say, there's a lot about you that I don't understand because we are a different species, or it's like we are. But if you'll just do it for me, and he may say no. And this is where you have to just sort of figure out what you're willing to live with. If he flat out says no, he may have a reason, and he may not be able to articulate what that reason is. And I think that's something that we push our guys sometimes. We want them to explain why to us, and they can't sometimes. They literally don't know how to explain why. So it comes back to communication with foreplay. And you may have asked him over and over again, but if it's not working, if you've asked him and he's not responding, then don't keep asking the same way. Figure out a new way to tell him what you want. Change it up and see if he's responsive to that. He just may not be. And so that's when you say, well, okay, I may not get foreplay, but I get some pretty good orgasms. I mean, maybe you don't, but what is good about the sex that you have? It may not be exactly what you want, but what is good about it? And appreciate what is good about it. All right, yeah, Kelly, yeah, they really don't know. They don't know how to explain themselves. And the more you press them on this, especially related to sex, the more they're going to shut down. And if you pressure your guy to explain something to you about his sexual performance, you are just going to get a shutdown and possibly a tantrum and passive aggressiveness, because there again, he's a cornered animal at that point. He's caged, cornered, and defending himself. All right, that's okay. That kind of covers my notes right now. So. Well, actually, Trisha had asked about sex therapy, and I do want to just mention that. I think I said something about it, that my colleague is a sex therapist. I may have her on here at some point so that we can talk about it with her. But yeah, I mean, if your guy's open to sex therapy, then do it. If he's open to going, then there's absolutely no harm in that. I would talk to the therapist first and see if she has any experience with Asperger's, and if she doesn't, if she's willing to learn a little bit before you start. But I want to open this up. I'm going to babble on and on a little bit more and see if you guys have any questions. We have a lot of comments, and I'm going to, while I'm waiting on you, I'm going to scroll back through and see if there's anything I missed. Okay, guys who seem asexual. Okay, yeah, there are men who just don't seem to have a whole lot of interest in sex at all. And it is true that I've worked with quite a few adults and teenagers who don't really seem to be interested in sex. And I would say that this is most likely a sensory thing, that there's not a whole lot of pleasure derived from sex for whatever reason. And also, it may be a sensory thing, but it also may be it may be very, very overwhelming to them. And so, again, it's kind of like that emotion, sexuality. There's a physiological drive there, and there's an emotional drive. And so, some men may just not have that physiological drive for sex, and they may not have that emotional drive for sex. So if you're in a relationship with a man who seems asexual, then it's a conversation that you can have with him and say, look, I get that you're not that interested in sex. It's important to try to get your head wrapped around the idea that that's not about you and not about his interest in you. Now, this is not the same as a guy who's refusing to have sex with you, but he wants to go and have sexual fantasies or even affairs with someone else. That's totally different. And if that's happening in your relationship, and it is happening for one of you that posted in the comments, not on the live here, but before today, that has to do with a relationship problem. There's a problem in the relationship. This is the case for even neurotypical relationships. When someone's having an affair outside of the marriage, it's a symptom of the problem. Now, it could be just the relationship dynamics. It could be a toxic relationship, or it could be narcissism, and that's another conversation. But if your guy is asexual and just not very interested in sex, it's a conversation to have with him and say, look, I get that this is not something that you really care that much about. I love to eat. I love to eat a lot. My guy doesn't eat much at all. He eats like a bird, but he understands that I like to eat, so he'll go out to restaurants with me. He'll cook dinner for me. I know that sounds crazy, but he really doesn't eat much at all. It's not a drive that he has. Food. He eats to sustain himself, but he doesn't enjoy food the way I do. And I really enjoy sex, and he does too, thank goodness. But if he didn't, then that's something that I can say to him, look, I know